chapter 2. John's Gospel, chapter 2. And we'll break it down into two parts, since that's the way it is. Today we're talking about a gracious guest and a fiery prophet. A gracious guest and a fiery prophet. You see almost two sides of Jesus as you look at this text today. You will first of all, in the first, 12 verses, see a gracious guest, and then in the latter verses, from verse 13 to about verse 22, you will then see a fiery prophet. So let's look first of all at the gracious guest. And somebody go ahead and please pick up and read the text. At least from verse 1 to verse 12. Yeah.
Okay. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine. Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from. Those servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here at Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and his disciples. There they stayed a few days.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we're examining now, of course, what we call the first miracle or sign of Jesus. There will be several different signs. In fact, John is specific in calling this a sign. And the word here is, and again, anytime I give you a Greek term, please note it. The term is semeion. He makes a distinguish, instead of calling it a miracle, he calls it a sign. Says that it is a sign. This term sign is a token that distinguishes one person or thing from another. In other words, this is to identify Jesus. The idea that you will see running through the Gospels is that Jesus did these miracles not necessarily for the sake of the people, but he did them so that he would be drawn out, so that he would be the one as the manifested Son of God, as the one who is the Son of God, as the one who spoke the unvarnished truth of the Word of God. The idea is that you'll see again with every miracle is that the miracles are actually asking you to look, the text is actually asking you to look beyond the miracle and see Jesus. It's easy to get caught up in miracles, isn't it? It's easy for especially Pentecostal folk to get caught up in signs and wonders and miracles and laying on of hands and healings. And I'm not saying that any of that is necessarily bad, but sometimes we get caught up in just the miracle when the miracle is actually supposed to point us to Jesus Christ. And that's why he did this, right? That's why he did the miracles, is it is supposed to point to Jesus Christ. It was pointing to himself, so that you may see Jesus and do what? You believe on him, right? And then in believing on him, you have eternal life, or life in his name. Yeah. Okay, so one of the obvious questions here, just some technicality stuff, one of the obvious questions is, what is the first miracle that is listed in the Gospel of John? Actually, that is understood to be the first miracle Jesus performed in his ministry. It is, of course, the wedding at Cana of Galilee. And, of course, what is the first miracle? Yeah, turning water into wine. And no, we're not going to have a discourse on whether or not this was grape juice or actual wine, or whether Jesus is promoting drinking. He's certainly not promoting getting drunk, right? We're not going to have that conversation. Do we really need to have that conversation? Because I don't think you need to argue from the standpoint of the sinless Son of God that he promotes drinking or being drunk, right? I don't think you need to argue from that point. There was a wine, a grape juice, obviously, that was not fermented and not an alcoholic. And then, of course, you waited and fermented and did all that stuff that it needs to be to ferment. But I don't think that is the case here. But there is a difference in the tasting of the wine, is that one is better than the other. That doesn't mean that one is more alcoholic than the other, but it just means that it's tasting better than the other, which we'll see in just a moment. Who are the invitees to the wedding? Who are the ones who are invited to the wedding?
The disciples.
Yes, the disciples.
Jesus' family.
Yes. The disciples, of course, Jesus and the disciples, and Jesus' mother is there. Jesus' mother is there. And one of the things that you see with this whole, one of the issues that we do see with this whole turning of water into wine is that the bridegroom, the host of the wedding, if he ran out of wine, it's not like saying, hey, run down to the QT and go pick up some more bottles of wine, okay? For one, you couldn't do that as easily back then as what you could probably do it today. For another, it was a massive embarrassment on the part of the groom and the bridegroom to run out of refreshments for the guests that he had invited. There would have been a big stigma, a big taboo, if you will, if he had run out of refreshments. It would have been the talk of the town. The wedding would have almost been cursed, if you will, if you'd run out. I mean, heaven help you if you run out of barbecue at the wedding, right? I think, okay, barbecue's not a good analogy, but you run out of wine, right, at the wedding. And so, therefore, he would have possibly even faced lawsuits because of the embarrassment on both sides of the family. And this is how serious hospitality is treated in the Middle East. What does Jesus say when his mother approaches him and says, hey, fix this? We've run out of wine. What does he say to her?
It's not my time.
Yeah, it's not my time. More specifically, yeah, I'm going to throw this thing. There we go. My hour is not yet come. More specifically, he says to her, my hour is not yet come. So what is he saying here? What is he talking about when he says, my hour is not yet come? Really what he is saying in this text, it was not the time for Jesus, the fullness of the glory of God, to go back with the Father. In other words, this is not the time for his entire glory to be shown. That time will come when he, first of all, dies on the cross. He is then buried. He is resurrected, and he ascends to the Father. That is the fullness of the glory of God, the manifest glory of God when he goes back with his Father because he has completed his task here on earth. That's what Jesus is saying. He will often refer to my hour, my time has not yet come. It's not time just yet. We're just getting started. It's not time just yet to go to the cross and show the full glory and purpose of what I'm doing. Regardless of that it's not my time, my hour, Jesus' time to complete the fullness of showing the glory of God, he does show some of his glory in taking the water pots that are going to be filled with water and turning them into wine. So he shows some of his glory. And this is what you get throughout the Gospels, is that Jesus shows some of his glory, but he never really shows the fullness of his glory or his purpose necessarily until we see him again crucified, buried, resurrected, and ascending back to the Father. But he does show glimpses of his glory. And again, what's the purpose for the glimpses shown of his glory? Why is Jesus doing this? That people might believe, right? That he is the Christ. Did we all have a bad weekend this weekend? Or what? Are we okay? Are we alive? But he's showing his glory that is not only his disciples, but everyone who was there, other people who were there, the attendees to the wedding, will see that he is the Christ and believe on him. And that's what the Bible says. And first and foremost, the disciples believed on him. Right? It's kind of important when you have your main core group who are constantly following you and hearing you teach and hearing you talk. It's kind of important that they are the first ones among those who believe on him. And we'll deal with the idea of disciple more than likely, maybe Friday or so. We'll deal with that idea a little bit further. Jesus is seen as a gracious guest. He is seen as a gracious guest. Jesus' gracious acts in this wedding save from embarrassment. Again, just to kind of recap some of the things I was saying here, about a week's worth or longer of preparation went into this wedding. That is gathering the main things. When you plan a wedding, you know it's going to be much, much, much longer than that. Trying to plan a wedding. Nobody's tried to do that just yet, have they? Plan a wedding. It's a long process. Whoever planned again the ceremony did not have enough wine. The better wine, of course, came from Jesus. Kind of relates to our lives somewhat. You can almost make an application of our lives, right? With this whole analogy of everyone who drinks the good wine first, and then they start to drink the inferior wine, and by the time it's all over with, all of this stuff, we've run out of the good wine, we're kind of getting drunk off the inferior wine. It kind of relates to life, if you will, right? This is what the bridegroom says, is that every man sets out the good wine first. When you're at the party, you set out the best stuff first. You don't start putting out the paper plates until all the fine china is gone, right? That kind of thing. You set out the best wine first. In other words, for most of us, or perhaps maybe most of us, a lot of us, life begins fairly well. Maybe you're born into a nice family. Maybe you're born with Christian parents. Or maybe you have it somewhat easy, even if you grew up poor. We grew up poor and we didn't know what growing up poor meant. I don't know if anybody else understands that concept or not, but life begins fairly well. It has its bumps, it has its bruises, but life begins fairly well. And then he says, well, we've set out the good wine first, and then after everyone has well drunk, in other words, you start living your life out. That's where you guys are, by the way. You're starting to drink, right? You're starting to live out your lives right now, right? You're in college. You're developing relationships. Maybe some of you will go on to universities. Maybe some of you will go on to be pastors and teachers or whatever we are going to be able to do in these days to come, right? All of that stuff. In other words, you just start living your life out. How many of you are planning on perhaps getting married? I was going to say Caleb's going to be. So maybe you'll get married one day. You'll have children if you like them. I don't know, but maybe if you'll have children or so one day. You start to live your life out, and then somewhere, I'm not going to say 40, because that's where I'm at, but somewhere along the road of life. You start tasting and sipping the inferior wine, right? I mean, things start to kind of just go downhill. I guess that's why they call it over the hill, and then you start to go down the hill, and you start careening down the hill, that kind of thing, right? You start to drink the inferior. In other words, there's nothing better for me in this life. Old age starts to set in. Your joints start to pop and creak and crack, and you start sounding like Rice Krispies. Anybody ever had Rice Krispies? Snap, crackle, pop, And sometimes, yeah. And this kind of thing doesn't have any kind of discrimination on age, per se. Yeah, sometimes people have difficulties and face life's inferior difficulties, if you will, even at your age, perhaps even younger than that. It's not that. But we realize this point is that our lives, that life itself, this human physical body is inferior. That one day it will fade and pass away, right? One day it will go and get weaker and weaker and weaker and pass away, and we'll just be another tombstone somewhere. But here's what the man says to Jesus. We usually set out the good wine first, and then we're well drunk, and then things start to get inferior and bad. But here's kind of a hope, if you will. What he says about Jesus, you have kept the good wine until now. In other words, we see somewhat of an eschatological hope here, that what Jesus promises for us is not a complete happiness right now. Right? It's not necessarily a complete happiness right now. There are a lot of people in this country and in this world that are very unhappy at this moment. Right? There are a lot of people who are going through difficulties, whether it's facing the pandemic, whether it's facing the fact that their candidate lost, whether it's facing the fact that the new candidate's coming in, all of this kind of stuff that people are facing nowadays. And what the promise is of a new wine, a better wine that's coming in, is that there is a promise of a hope beyond this life. That I don't get hung up. I mean, people are so depressed because the current president lost and we've got some other new guy coming in. Is that all you hang your hope on? Right? Is that all you put your trust in? Is whoever changes of the guard in the White House? That's not what we put our hope in, right? My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. And I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus, on Christ, the solid rock I stand. Right? That's where we place our hope at. Right? Yeah.
I was talking to Dr. Freeman about this Tuesday. Yeah, that's right. And we were talking about kind of like the presidents are changing and Biden becoming our new president and whatnot. And I kind of brought it up. I was like, I'm also a conservative, right? I mean, that's
right.
Nothing wrong with Donald Trump. I don't see. I mean, I'm not that against Biden either. I'm not,
Yeah.
But I often see it's like the people who are freaking out the most and stuff about Trump losing also claim to be Christians, and if we're not supposed to be part of this world, and so I understand we should be a part of politics and stuff to help people, as that's our job as Christians also. But I like, what do you think about the people who are supposedly like reverends and supposedly big time Christians, but are so hateful towards Kamala and Biden and stuff, and they're acting like Trump is the Messiah? You know, what do you think?
Oh yeah. Exactly. That's been my mentality the whole time. I am not a Trumper. Okay. I'm not caught into Trumpism. Okay. That's the thing. You know. I am for Jesus Christ. I mean, does it change anything? We've seen this over the years, right? You've had Bush and Clinton and Obama and Trump. I mean, but do any, and you can even go back as far as any of the presidents, does any of that change the fact that Jesus is still King of Kings and Lord of Lords? Does any of that change the fact that he's still ruling and reigning on his throne? Absolutely not. And this is the analogy that we're using here, is that there is something better for us. There is something better for us if we will simply just exalt Christ. I know people who are falling all to pieces because of this election, who are falling all to pieces, and they're still giving out hope and trying to hold on to hope. Something's going to happen. Something's in the air. Trump's going to come. I mean, give it up. Does it really matter that much? I mean, really, does it matter that much? Is it going to change who you are in Christ? Is it going to do anything to your spiritual blessings in Christ? Anyway, that's my sermon for this morning. I'll leave it there, okay? So we see this idea of Jesus and this gracious guest, and we could kind of hang there for a little while, but to me, even the more significant thing is that we see Jesus as this, and you can't see the writing there, but it says Jesus the fiery prophet. Jesus the fiery prophet. If we were to analyze Jesus' actions, he is very much a gracious guest at this wedding, but then he goes to the temple, and of course, what does he do? We haven't read what he does, have we? Let's pick up in verse 13 and actually read what Jesus does. Because I wonder how a psychologist or a psychiatrist would analyze Jesus at this point in time. Because here is Jesus, he's been the gracious guest, what you expect of Jesus, right? What modern day Christianity expects of Jesus. He's going to go into the house, and he's going to participate in the wedding, and he's going to be all nice and kind and cute and everything else like that. But what we don't really expect from Jesus is what he's about to do in this text, right? That's what we see here. So go ahead, somebody pick it up in verse 13, please.
It was nearly the time for the Jewish Passover celebration, so Jesus went to Jerusalem. In the temple area, he saw merchants selling cattle, sheep, and doves for sacrifices. He also saw dealers at tables exchanging foreign money. Jesus made a whip from some ropes and chased them all out of the temple. He drove out the sheep and cattle, scattered the money changers' coins over the floor, and turned over their tables. How far do you want to go?
Go down to verse 22, please.
Then going over to the people who sold doves, he told them, "Get these things out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace." Then his disciples remembered this prophecy from the Scriptures. "Passion for God's house will consume me." But the Jewish leaders demanded, "What are you doing? If God gave you authority to do this, show us a miraculous sign to prove it." "All right," Jesus replied, "destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." "What?" they exclaimed. "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you can rebuild it in 3 days?" But when Jesus said this temple, he meant his own body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered he had said this, and they believed both the Scriptures and what Jesus had said.
Thank you. Let's do a little bit of inductive study before we get to the slides for a moment. Let's do a little bit of inductive study. Go back to verse 13. If I were doing some inductive study, what's the first time reference I would reference here? What I would highlight? Yeah, the Jewish Passover, which happens.
Everyone goes to Jerusalem.
How many? As far as time reference is concerned, how many times does this Passover happen?
One per year.
Once a year, right? Yeah, once a year it happens. And this is the first Passover that we're seeing here in the text. And this is pretty significant, all right? Here's the Passover. Where is he? Where's a location and a geography that Jesus is going to?
Jerusalem.
Yeah, he's going to Jerusalem, and then even more specifically to the temple, right? He's going to the temple, and he sees people selling oxen and sheep and pigeons and all this kind of other stuff, right? And then one of the more specific things that I will ask specifically on a test is look at verse 16. What did Jesus say?
Take these things away, and I'll make my Father's house
A house of trade, a house of merchandise. Not my Father's house shall be a house of prayer. You find that phrase in other Gospels, right? But more specifically in this text, it is don't make my Father's house a house of merchandise or a house of trade. So when I ask that on a test, make sure you don't put my Father's house should be a house of prayer. I'm going to ask you specifically, what did John record Jesus saying? And John recorded Jesus saying, don't make my house a house of merchandise or of trade. Which brings me now to the historical background to this particular section as to why he would say that to those that are at the temple. Why does he clue in on making my Father's house a house of merchandise and a house of trade? In other words, don't making it that way. Toward the end of the Old Testament, the second temple, remember, is rebuilt under Zerubbabel. This is Ezra, Haggai, folks like that who record this, right? Basically, the temple doesn't become the place of worship. And you need to get this, by the way. It doesn't become the place of worship that it used to be when Solomon built the temple. Remember what happened to Solomon's temple? It was destroyed by... Yes, the Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar, right? And so they rebuilt. When they were allowed to go back in, they were allowed to rebuild the temple, but many people did not see this new temple the way they saw the old temple. It's kind of like a new church versus an old church. Oh, we used to shout and dance all in the old sanctuary, but now we got this new building, and I just don't feel the presence of God anymore. Anybody ever heard that?
Yeah.
I've heard that before. Well, it's the same concept. It's the same concept. Right? We don't sense the Spirit of God. God said he was going to place his name on Solomon's temple, and yet here we have this new temple. And so by Malachi's day, temple morale was so low, it was so bad that you had various things going on. By Malachi's day, you have questions like, well, and this is Haggai here, who is left among you that saw this house in her first glory, talking about Solomon's temple, and how do you see it now? Is it not in comparison to nothing? In other words, this is okay, but this is nothing like Solomon's temple. And so therefore, you have, by Malachi's day, you have temple morale being so bad that they are accused of being not bringing the tithe, robbing God, basically. Not bringing the tithe into the storehouse. They are not, I don't know if you can see it or not, but they are not enthusiastic to rebuild. They're told to rebuild the temple of God. And what do? They go back and start rebuilding their own homes and houses and lives. But they don't want to work on the building. They don't want to work on the temple. And so they're not enthusiastic to build. And then when they do finally build the temple, again, they try to rob God. They failure to bring the tithe. And then when they do bring sacrifices into the temple, Malachi records that they bring injured, blemished sacrifices when they were supposed to bring perfect sacrifices without spot or without blemish. All of this is a stigmatism on this new temple. Well, that ends the Old Testament. Then you have the intertestamental period. The intertestamental period is marked by a few things that we don't see in the Old Testament, but we do see in the New Testament, and so that's why I'm going to go here right now. The intertestamental period brings us the rise of the Greeks. the Greeks, you will have remembered some of this, hopefully, perhaps from Corinthians when we talked about this. One of the major figures in the intertestamental period is Alexander the Great. And there's a few things I want you to note about Alexander the Great. He is Philip's son. He was a soldier from the beginning of his life. In fact, he was set out on the battlefield at 12 years old. When Philip, his father, dies, the empire is left to Alexander. All this is going to tie in just a moment, and you're going to go, aha. Hopefully. What happens with Alexander the Great? Alexander the Great decides, how in the world can I spread a common, how can I unify the people, since we're all talking about unity these days. How can I unify the people? How can I bring them together? Well, there's a couple of things that you can do. First of all, by creating a common, or not creating a common language, but making that the official language of the day. And that was the Greek language. Greek was the official language of the day. It was the official language of Jesus' day. It was the language of Alexander's empire. When you learn the language, you begin to learn the culture. If ever I'd learned Spanish, I know what you people are saying for one, but then I can maybe perhaps also relate to your culture a little bit if I learn the language. If you spend time over in a Spanish speaking or any kind of culture with a language, when you start to learn the language, you start to learn the culture. And I can know whether or not you were talking about me or not, that kind of thing. But anyway, it becomes the language. Greek becomes the language of commerce and schools and government, and it spreads like wildfire. This is one of the things actually positive, that it helps spread the gospel. Because, of course, this is also the same language that is used even on into Paul's day when he starts to minister. So it does help spread the gospel. The problem is that one of the negative effects is Hellenism. Hellenism is the Greek culture, and the power of Hellenism, the attractiveness, if you will, of Hellenism was that you could retain your ancestral traditions. In other words, you could be Jewish and serve Yahweh. You could even obtain some of your language and even your religion. You just simply add Hellenism to it. You add the Greek culture to it. It made it very attractive. It made it very attractive, this Greek culture. You don't have to stop at one God. Why stop at one God? Add a couple more to it. It'll help brighten your day. It'll help you out with fertility or with crops or with whatever else that you have going on in your life. That was the Greek culture, and it spread quickly. But there's a problem with that. Jews who believe in one God, right? The Lord our God is one Lord, are going to have a problem with polytheism. They've come out of a long line of polytheistic problems, right? That's been their whole issue in the Old Testament, is they went a-whoring after other gods, right? They went chasing after other gods. So watch this. Judaism begins to, you don't have to get the Hebrew or the Greek, I'm just trying to show you an analogy here. Judaism begins to divide because of the Greek culture, because of Hellenism. In 250 BC, Hellenistic culture is so strong that the Jews have to translate the Old Testament Hebrew, which is what this is here, into the Greek language. In other words, this is Genesis 1:1. Here's Genesis 1:1 in the Greek language. This is called, please know this if you don't know it already, but especially know it for a test or something you might see, is called the Septuagint. The Septuagint is a Greek translation of the Old Testament. A Greek translation of the Old Testament. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'ot ha'eretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and then you see the same thing. And by the way, you read Hebrew from this side to that side, and then you see the same thing here in Greek. In Narche Ebuisen Hatheos Ton Uranon Kai Ten Game. Yeah.
Can you go back a slide real quick?
You know that.
Back a slide, yes. I can go back a slide. Yes.
I feel like that's harder to learn than Spanish. You could learn Spanish.
I can. If I would just probably take the time for my brain to process, it would. I probably could. I used to quote some of a Spanish poem that I had to recite in a competition in high school or something like that. But now I don't even remember how it goes.
Which was the author?
Sorry,
Which was the author?
the author. Oh, I don't even remember the author. It's something about singing by the river. Cantar de Agua del Rio. Something about singing by the river. Didn't that say I sing by the river or something like that? Yeah, something like that. But that's all I can remember now. You know, it's been that long. That was high school. I'm not going to tell you how many years ago that was. All right, so this translated. In other words, Jews are starting to lose their language and their culture. They're starting to kind of get lost in the division. Real quick, and I promise you, I'm coming to a point in a couple of slides. All right, you have a division between two major groups. You have the Hasidim. The Hasidim. They're the pious ones, yes.
You go back a slide more.
Are you serious?
It's really less than this.
Yeah, I had to go back. See, I was trying to get it, but you said because he had to go back because it's a long.
All right, where are we at? Just because I'm going to pause.
I'll get
The Hellenistic culture.
The Hellenist. That's the top of the slide. Caleb, that's the top of the slide, man.
I was still behind.
Go back. It's on YouTube. Go back and watch the video.
All right. Yeah, this send me the link.
It's on my personal channel, all right? The Hellenistic culture is so strong. You might find some other interesting preaching on there, teaching, and all kinds
Check
of
it
stuff.
out.
Hopefully no singing. I don't think I tried to sing at all.
I'm still something.
Go ahead. It's all there.
You go in chapel and preach your sermon.
It's all there. Nobody remembers that stuff. Anyway,
I'm gonna preach what we learned today about the wine.
that's all right. That's all right. Just don't tell people that Jesus promoted getting drunk or drinking wine.
Jesus said, "Drink up, boys."
Hellenistic culture is so strong that Jews have to translate the Old Testament Hebrew into a Greek language, and the translation is called the Septuagint. The Septuagint.
Did I preach about Enoch, actually?
Don't get me started.
How him and Elijah are coming back?
If you do, I'm going to get up there and cry heretic. All right.
Kick him out. Kick him out.
There are two groups of Jews that are formed. They're the Hasidims. They're the pious ones. They hate Hellenism. They hate the Greek culture. They try to remain faithful to the Old Testament traditions. Then you had some Jews who were called Hellenizers. They thought, Judaism needs a facelift. We need to kind of, intermix with the Greeks. I mean, it's the new thing coming anyway, right? I mean, that's the thing. They were pro-Greek, pro-Hellenism. Judaism needs to be modernized. And they saw Hellenism as the way to do this. Yeah, I've got time. If Jordan will stop talking heresy, I've got time.
My fault.
Where we at?
Don't skip. Do not skip. I'm getting there.
Anybody want to guess?
We have to write slow so we can understand our writing, so that way we can study.
That's true. I got some chicken scratch going on right now.
If I couldn't go back and read it.
Well, we used to not allow recordings, to take place You know, in fact, there were some teachers that were big sticklers on, hey, don't you record, audio record, or anything like that in class. You were just left to the will of your chicken scratch, you know, that kind of thing. But you know, now because of modern technology, and particularly because of COVID, thank God for COVID, because of COVID, just in case we have to, you know, go online and things like that, you know, yeah. Well, you know, in everything, Paul says, give thanks. You gotta find, if you're gonna have some lemons, what do? You make lemonade, all right? So, you know, there is a bright side to things. Because of that, we have to put everything online now, or at least some of us are trying to put everything online, so that if you need to, you can go back and look at it, you know, that kind of thing. So, you know, some of us are trying to do that anyway. All right, so let's dig a little deeper. Let's dig a little deeper into the intertestamental period here. Because by 175 BC, you have a guy who's about the most wicked Antichrist figure in the intertestamental period, and his name is Antiochus Epiphanes IV. He is the new leader over the Greeks. He has two big sins that will show up in the New Testament. He ruined the ancient custom of the high priest because it was supposed to be only the Levites only. He ruined it by placing a Greek man named Jason as the high priest. Jason's a good Greek name.
Really?
Yeah.
That's my cousin.
No,
Jason and Antiochus, I always love this part of my talk, okay? Jason and Antiochus built a gym next to the church, next to the temple, yes, yeah. Gymnos is the Greek term for naked. In other words, next to the church, next to the temple, they built a gym and they competed naked. You'd hate to be in that gym class, wouldn't you? They were there. They competed naked. And this was not only Greeks, but also pro-Greek Jews who were doing these things in this gym. And the Hasidim, the pure, the pious ones, were outraged. They were angered. I mean, this is an abomination. And again, the Hellenistic pro-Greek Jews thought, so what? It's all right. Anybody have any idea? Anybody have any idea of these two groups, the Hasidim, the Hellenistic Jews? Do you have any idea of who these might be in the New Testament?
That's the Sadducees.
Right. Are you telling me you have not gotten this done as much as I jabbed?
I'm gonna be honest. I haven't. Sorry, I haven't either. Thank you, Caleb.
Y'all are jabbering too much. I have to put one in one corner and face one in another corner.
You speak really fast, really good, but really fast.
Thank you. I'm glad that I speak really good. I told you, you look on the bright side of everything. I have been told that I sometimes talk too fast, in which I will, for that, forgive you.
No, like you can understand it, but you don't want to shut off your ears. You want to be able to hear, and like
Yes.
so it slows down one thing.
I have been told that I am like a fire hydrant trying to pour water into a tiny cup. That's what I've been told.
That's a good enough.
Who told you
I'm
that?
trying to.
Mr. Al Bucklew, that's on video by the way, who told me that that trying to take notes from me is like trying to get water from a fire hydrant in a tiny cup.
That's a really good analogy. That's impressive.
If he ever watches this video, I want you to know, Al, I love you, okay? But
Yes.
he also says I'm too gracious, which I'm trying to, kind of detour from that. I'm trying to detour from that analogy.
Wait, what do you mean two graces?
Oh, you'll find out. If you haven't found out by now, you'll find out.
You can fail me.
He has a big heart.
Please fail me.
Okay, are we here?
Yeah, we're good.
All right.
Oh wait, I'm just playing.
All right. The Hasidim stayed away from the temple and primarily studied and taught God's law in the synagogues. Who is this in the New Testament? No. Yeah, if it's not the one, it's the other. The Pharisees, right? Yes, the Pharisees. The Hellenistic, now here's the point. Here, I did all the historical background to bring you now to this point. And that is that it's the Hellenistic Jews who controlled the temple. They were the religious bureaucrats in Jesus' day, because the temple was all about money. And again, who are the Hellenistic Jews by Jesus' day? They are they're the Pharisees. Yeah, the Hellenistic Jews are the Sadducees.
Sorry, that's my bad.
The Sadducees.
Wait, they got it wrong and it was right there.
Did what?
You said the wrong one?
No, yeah, I
Yes.
thought he was
Yes.
rehashing the first point.
No.
I was just saying it again.
Hasidim are the Pharisees, the pious ones. They taught God's law in the synagogues. The Hellenistic Jews controlled the temple. They were the religious bureaucrats.
Should this have already started making sense to me?
Possibly.
Because you said in a couple of slides you're going to get it all.
Possibly. Well, see, the Hellenistic Jews, the Sadducees, had nothing to do. They didn't bother Jesus until he bothered their money. That's the thing. They didn't have anything to do with Jesus. Okay, I'm going to move over here. Sarah's having problems. I'm going to move over here.
She's trying to see over Caleb's coconut head.
Oh, I got you.
Y'all handle that outside, all right?
I'm just playing. He knows all of them.
Does that make sense now? The Sadducees, now, by the way, I didn't tell you this, but both of these groups hated one another. In fact, civil war just about broke out and did break out because both of these groups hated one another.
Wait, why did they hate each other so bad?
Because one was for the Greek culture and one was against the Greek culture. One was trying to preserve Jewish heritage and the other said, we don't care.
Now it makes sense.
Yes.
Yes.
And they hate, and by the way, one of the few times they actually come together, can anybody guess? When they actually come to, yes, is to kill Jesus.
Teamwork, right?
Teamwork. The Pharisees were highly bothered by Jesus because he was always bothering their religion, always bothering their spirituality. The Sadducees didn't have anything to do with Jesus until he got in the temple, flipped over the tables, and started messing with their money. And then it's recorded in other Gospels, hey, by the Sadducees, hey, we got to kill him. He's going to mess with our money. Kind of sounds like some TV evangelist. Yes, ma'am.
The Pharisees, they don't start like making more laws from the Old Testament.
Yes.
Making more things.
Yeah. They would have been the ones who would have put on more man-made traditions. They would have taken God's law and keep the Sabbath day holy. They would have been the ones to say, hey, this is how you can keep the Sabbath day holy. You can only walk so many miles on the Sabbath day. In other words, they would have, strained out a camel.
So did Jesus...
Something like that. I can't remember what it is. Something about a camel and that. I can't remember the analogy. Anyway, yes. But
You're
they
talking about their crap.
I know. That's what happened to me.
It's something about
Just a
camel
straight out
going through a
eye of the needle. That's
No,
not
it's
quite
a
the
straw.
same analogy.
It's
But
a straw,
something.
isn't it? Pulling a camel through something straw.
No, that's Hunter's Island.
Okay.
The needle.
All right. So when Jesus does this, right, and they start talking about his zeal for the house of God, and they say, "Show us a sign," which is what the Pharisees would constantly do, and Sadducees would constantly do. Show us a sign. What's going to be the sign? What does Jesus say in the next 10 minutes we have left, or actually not really 10 minutes, but in the next few minutes we have left? What does Jesus say? Show us a sign. What does Jesus say to them? Tear down. All right, and what is he talking about?
Spiritual.
About a king.
He's not talking about the actual temple. He's talking about his own body, right? With the first Passover. Okay, you already have this. At least you should have this, right? What does Jesus say when he turns over the tables of the money changers in John's Gospel? Don't make my Father's house a house of merchandise, a house of trade, that kind of thing. Here's the Passover, and I don't have time to go into all of this, but first of all, what did Jesus foretell? You have this. This is the text here. What is Jesus talking about in this first Passover when he says, tear down this temple?
That he's gonna die.
Yes, he's talking about his death. If we had time, we'd look at the second Passover in 651. And guess what the analogy is there? It's talking about his death. If you had time to look at the third and last Passover, it is related to his death. In other words, please note this, by the way, that the Passover is a type and a shadow for Jesus' death. A type and a shadow for Jesus. In other words, it is foreseeing Jesus' death. I don't have time for anything else. I had one more slide, but we'll get to it Friday. God bless you.
God bless you.